morning. I'm going to be I don't know if I can make it through the entire thing because politics is usually one of the most boring things on this god-given planet. But I'm going to be trying to watch the entire United Nations Security Council meeting on Ukraine and comment on what the different candidates here are actually saying. This was a couple of days ago, might have even been yesterday. And unlike, for example, the US presidential elections, where you could not get like the actual, for example, presidential debates on YouTube, which to me was laughable, calling it a democracy if you can't watch the entire debate on your home computer, but you need to watch 5-minute sound bites by the most popular news commentary agencies, and you can't even watch the whole debate on your own computer. In Finland, in presidential debates, even every minor party candidate gets their own time slot. You can watch them talk about their points of view and what they're actually about. But in the US election, you could basically watch Trump or Biden, and they made it pretty clear early on that they're not going to give any of the other candidates the time of the day, and it was awful. So this, I hope, is without the constant commentary of a news reporter, so I can actually make my own commentary, so we'll see. So we will now be quietly watching the actual professionals talk. The people whose name will go down in history as the ultimate evil if we do fail at this. By the way, I am still as my primary focus of interest building the UFO, which is what I started about 10 years ago. I have completed most of the subsystem development and research, but it took longer than I anticipated. Discovering how to make the navigation AI and power source were the two most difficult things. The hull shape and materials and stuff like that were really easy, but the general thing took me almost 10 years to get my UFO plan to work, so that took a while. Now I am in a position where if I get sufficient funding, I can actually build it without needing to research it and going through the trial and error of what works. I actually have a working model. So let's do this. By the way, the same model that predicted the Ukrainian war in 2011, when it happened in 2014, it predicted it in 2011, is now predicting 95% chance of global thermonuclear war by 2035. Just thought I'd let you know.
960th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threat to international peace and security. The agenda is, I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. Госпожа председатель, Российская Федерация запрашивает проведение процедурного голосования по предложению провести этот митинг по инициативе Соединенных Штатов.
Would be helpful if they had English subtitles.
Предложение по созыву сегодняшнего заседания указал, что рассматривает расположение российских войск на российской же территории в качестве угрозы международному миру и безопасности. Это является не только неприемлемым вмешательством во внутренние дела нашего государства, но и попыткой введения в заблуждение международного сообщества.
Yeah, there's no subtitles on that thing, and I can't speak Russian well enough.
They're being put in an extremely difficult position.
This one has translation. I don't like spoken translation, but...
The 8,960th meeting of the Security
Auto-generated,
Council
not gonna do that.
called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threat to international peace and security. The agenda is, I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the Russian Federation is asking for a procedural vote on the proposal to hold this meeting on the initiative of the United States. The delegation of the US, in explaining its proposal on convening this meeting, has pointed out that it considers the deployment of Russian troops within Russian territory as a threat to international peace and security. This is not only unacceptable interference in the domestic affairs of our state, but also an attempt to mislead the international community on the situation in the region and also the reason for the current global tensions. We are being asked to convene a Security Council meeting on unfounded accusations that we have refuted frequently. Furthermore, we frequently refuted, often consistently refuted. Furthermore, the open format for discussion proposed by the US on this extremely sensitive topic is making this a classic example of megaphone diplomacy and working in public, for the public rather. There's a need to review this, and we've all stated this frequently. We do not think that this will help to bring this council together. Rather, we fully understand that the desire of our American colleagues to whip up hysterics regarding its own situations regarding the so-called Russian active aggression is something that they want to do, including within the Security Council from this rostrum. Our Security Council colleagues are being put in an extremely difficult position. This is of great harm, this hysteria, to Ukraine itself. The president of which, as we've seen, has asked Western countries a few days ago not to whip up hysterics regarding the deployment of Russian troops near the border, since this all harms the Ukrainian economy. We do not need this panic, said President Zelensky. Rather, this is needed for those people who believe in the myth of the Russian aggression. The Ukrainian officials have talked about a lack of a threat from Russia. In particular, this pertains to the Minister of Defense, the President himself, Mr. Zelensky, who have said themselves that they do not see in this activity that we are being talked about today as a threat. We are prepared to disseminate this to you later. We would urge all colleagues to not use the rostrum of the Security Council to push forward the propaganda beliefs of our colleagues. We would also like to remind members of the Security Council that the Russian delegation in December announced its plans to have an annual discussion of the situation in Ukraine during our presidency of the Council that starts from tomorrow. The 7th anniversary of the adoption of the package of measures of the Minsk agreements will be an excellent opportunity for us to constructively show the Security Council's commitment to 2202. That is the international basis for the Ukrainian settlement. The event is planned for the 17th of February. If our American colleagues really need to say in public any additional information about this, they can fully do this during the planned meeting in February. We would urge all sensible members of the Council not to support this provocative proposal and treat the UN Charter with respect. Thank you.
The representative of the Russian Federation, I give the floor to the representative of the US.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As our colleague stated, we have called for this meeting, and we've called for this meeting because of what we have all witnessed over the course of the past few months in terms of the actions of the Russian Federation on the territory on the border with Ukraine. They indicate that it's in their own territory, but it is also very close to their neighbor's border. It's a neighbor that has been invaded already before. It's a neighbor that has Russian troops occupying their territory. We have had numerous meetings, over 100 meetings over the course of the past few weeks, both with Russian officials and in consultations with our European and Ukrainian colleagues. All of these meetings have been in private. We think it's now time to have a meeting in public and have this discussed in a public forum. We have worked with the Ukrainians at their request to provide assistance to them so that they can prepare for what they see as inevitable, including having provided $200 million in assistance in recent weeks and over $5 billion in assistance since 2014. And that is so that they can be prepared. You've heard from our Russian colleagues that we're calling for this meeting to make you all feel uncomfortable. Imagine how uncomfortable you would be if you had 100,000 troops sitting on your border in the way that these troops are sitting on the border with Ukraine. For us, this is about peace and security. It's about honoring the UN Charter that calls on us as members of the Security Council to protect peace and security. So this is not about anti. It's not about rhetoric. It's not about U.S. and Russia. But this is about peace and security of one of our member states. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States. In view of the request and the comments made by members of the Security Council, I intend to put the provisional agenda to a vote. Accordingly, I shall put it to the vote now. Will those in favor of the adoption of the provisional agenda please raise their hand?
Might not be much, but I'm participating.
Those against? Abstention? The result of the voting is as follows. 10 votes in favor, 2 votes against, 3 abstentions. The provisional agenda has been adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Belarus, Lithuania, Poland, and Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, to participate in the meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Recalling the Security Council latest note 507 on its working methods, I wish to encourage all speakers, both members and non-members of the Council, to deliver their statements in 5 minutes or less. Note 507 also encouraged briefers to be succinct and to focus on key issues. In this spirit, briefers are further encouraged to limit their initial remarks to 7 to 10 minutes. Everyone is also encouraged to wear a mask at all times, including while delivering remarks. I now give the floor to Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you. Madam President, the United Nations is closely following the ongoing diplomatic discussions on the future of European peace and security architecture.
That was too obvious. Playing fast and loose, Mr. God.
Captain Malik, welcome aboard the Quinch.
Thank you, Captain. My aides. It's a beautiful ship. Earth has been very good to Mr. Mao.
Do you like cucumbers?
I was going to ask you where you got those lovely couches, but I don't want to run out of sparkling conversation before your boss joins us.
I don't think that will be a problem.
The Martian eating all those favorites. Ooh, food.
Madam Undersecretary, I appreciate your comment.
Just get to the fucking point.
You even When you exonerate my family unconditionally, unfreeze my assets, we'll talk about how I can help keep Earth and Mars from blowing up this whole goddamn system. I'll remind you, I chose to work with Earth first.
And selling yourself to Mars was the remedy for a lover's quarrel.
In time, Earth may be granted access to the protomolecule, same as Mars. You'll partner with my companies in funding and research. Mars and Earth will maintain peace through balance, which you prefer to call mutually assured destruction.
And you'll remain in the middle, benefiting from both, somehow loyal to both.
It's that simple.
A lovely thought. But when parents fight, the child has a crisis of loyalty.
You've got that backwards, madame. Earth and Mars are the children here, screaming for their trinkets, blind to a miracle. What is it?
Sir, an urgent type beam from the Secretariat, right?
Excuse me?
It's for you, sir, and the Undersecretary.
Put it up.
Time is short and I'll be brief. Martian Defense Minister Korshunov suffered a fatal heart attack earlier this evening. Simultaneously, the MCRN Karakul, dispatched by Korshunov to take delivery of your protomolecule technology, was destroyed over Ganymede. And I gave the order. And I can give the same order to end your life where you breathe at the same coordinates I'm sending this message.
You led him right to me.
Don't be an
That
idiot.
thought in mind. Monsieur Mel, there were 2 men in the entire universe who could protect your protomolecule project, and now Korshunov is dead. I can assure you, I'm the only friend you have left, and do not test my resolve on this. Christian, if you're listening, you taught me, you drilled it into my head, that Earth must come first. And now you throw me to the wolves for fulfilling my sacred oath, while you grovel at the foot of Mars and Jules Pierre Mao. And that is the real betrayal here. So, Jules, you will clean up the mess you made for me. You will return to Earth alone. You will await my instructions, and you will get the fuck back to work.
Easy now.
That's Hollywood's view on this lady.
Among representatives of the Russian Federation, the United States, members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the European Union, and the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe. We hope the outcome of these talks will strengthen peace and security in Europe, including for Ukraine. Madam President, although not an active participant in these exchanges, in all his contacts, the Secretary General has unequivocally supported the ongoing diplomatic efforts at all levels. Still, we remain greatly concerned that, even as these efforts continue, tensions keep escalating and a dangerous military buildup is in the heart of Europe. It is reported that over 100,000 troops and heavy weaponry from the Russian Federation are positioned along the border with Ukraine. Unspecified numbers of Russian troops and weaponry are also reportedly being deployed to Belarus ahead of large-scale joint military exercises in February on the borders with Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states. NATO members are reportedly planning additional deployments in Eastern European member states, and NATO has advised that 8,500 troops are now on high alert. Accusations and recriminations among the various actors involved in the ongoing discussions have created uncertainty and apprehension for many that a military confrontation is impending. Madam President, the Secretary General has made clear that there can be no alternative to diplomacy and dialogue to deal with the complex, long-standing security concerns and threat perceptions that have been raised. He has expressed his strong belief that there should not be any military intervention in this context and that diplomacy should prevail. He's been equally explicit that any such intervention by one country in another would be against international law and the United Nations Charter.
If Russia continues to build forces in its own country, doesn't place them in the eastern Donbass region or Crimea more than a token force, most of their force remains on their own side and they do not invade, and the US declares more sanctions, is this the kind of action that the Undersecretary General is calling an intervention in another country's affairs? By the way, thank you for joining in, Iceland.
His expectation is that we all contribute to avoiding confrontation and to creating conditions for a diplomatic solution to end this crisis. We therefore welcome the steps taken so far by all involved in dialogue. We urge and expect all actors to build on these efforts and to remain focused on pursuing diplomatic solutions by engaging in good faith. We further urge all actors to refrain from provocative rhetoric and actions to maximize the chance for diplomacy to succeed. Achieving mutual understanding and lasting, mutually acceptable arrangements is the best way to safeguard regional and international peace and security in the interests of all. Madam President, let me repeat the full commitment of the United Nations to the sovereignty, political independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, in accordance with relevant General Assembly resolutions. It is important, especially at this time, for the international community to intensify its support for the efforts of the Normandy 4 and of the OSCE-led Trilateral Contact Group to ensure the implementation of the Minsk Agreement endorsed by this Council in its Resolution 2202. We welcome the recent meeting of the Normandy 4 advisors in Paris and their agreement to reconvene shortly in Berlin as another sign that diplomacy can work. We commend these efforts and those of the OSCE Special Monitors Mission. Likewise, United Nations agencies in Ukraine are committed to continue delivering on their mandates in accordance with the humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality, humanity, and independence. Safe, unimpeded humanitarian access must be respected under any circumstances to provide support to the 2.9 million people in need of assistance, with the majority in non-government controlled areas. In this regard, I encourage member states to continue to Further, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine continues to document civilian casualties in the conflict area. Madam President, no one is watching the current diplomatic efforts more than the people of Ukraine. They have endured a conflict that has taken over 14,000 lives since 2014, and that tragically is still far from resolution. It is painfully obvious that any new escalation in or around Ukraine would mean more needless killing and destruction. Whatever one's position regarding the current situation or the status quo in eastern Ukraine, this should be inconceivable. The fact that it is not should give us pause. The principles enshrined in the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, and multiple other commitments to safeguard regional and international peace and security are crystal clear. Any escalation or new conflict would deal another serious blow to the architecture so painstakingly built up over the last 75 years to maintain international peace and security, just when we need it most. Once again, I'd like to stress the Secretary General's appeal to all concerned to take immediate steps to de-escalate tensions and continue on the diplomatic path. The United Nations stands ready to support all efforts to that end. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Undersecretary General DiCarlo, for your briefing. Colleagues, the situation we're facing in Europe is urgent and dangerous, and the stakes for Ukraine and for every UN member state could not be higher. Russia's actions strike at the very heart of the UN Charter. This is as clear and consequential a threat to peace and security as anyone can imagine. In the wake of World War II, the Council was formed to address precisely the kind of threat that Ukraine now faces. As Article 39 says, the Security Council shall determine the existence of any threat to the peace. Thus, our charge is not only to address conflicts after they occur, but also to prevent them from happening in the first place. This is why today's meeting is so crucial. Russia's aggression today not only threatens Ukraine, it also threatens Europe. It threatens the international order this body is charged with upholding. An order that, if it stands for anything, stands for the principle that one country cannot simply redraw another country's borders by force or make another country's people live under a government they did not choose. We continue to hope Russia chooses the
se kipu sinänsä, sitä on oppinut tykkäämään siitä tässä niin kuin vuosien varrella. Et se on tietynlainen ystävä, että sitä kun pystyy tiettyyn määrin kestämään, niin kilpailutilanteessa se on aika hyvä etu.
path of diplomacy over the path of conflict in Ukraine. But we cannot just wait and see. It is crucial that this council address the risk that their aggressive and destabilizing behavior poses across the globe. First, let's be clear about the facts. Russia has assembled a massive military force of more than 100,000 troops along Ukraine's border. These are combat forces, and special forces prepared to conduct offensive actions into Ukraine. This is the largest, hear me clearly, mobilization of troops in Europe in decades. And as we speak, Russia is sending even more forces and arms to join them. Russia has already used more than 2,000 rail cars to move troops and weaponry from across Russia to the Ukrainian border. Russia has also moved nearly 5,000 troops into Belarus with short-range ballistic missiles, special forces, and anti-aircraft batteries. We've seen evidence that Russia intends to expand that presence to more than 30,000 troops near the Belarus-Ukraine border, less than 2 hours north of Kyiv, by early February. In addition to military activity, we've also seen a dramatic spike in cyber attacks on Ukraine in recent weeks. Russian military and intelligence services are spreading disinformation through state-owned media and proxy sites, and they are attempting without any factual basis to paint Ukraine and Western countries as the aggressors to fabricate a pretext for attack. Russia's military buildup on the border has been paired with extensive new demands and aggressive rhetoric. This is an escalation and a pattern of aggression that we've seen from Russia again and again. In 2014, Russia illegally invaded and seized Crimea. In 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. Russian troops are currently refusing to depart Moldova despite the wishes of the Moldovan people and their democratically elected government. And in the Donbas region of Ukraine, Russian separatists continue to foment and ignore violence toward the Ukrainian people. Recently, Russia has threatened to take military action and beyond. If Russia further invades Ukraine, none of us will be able to say we didn't see it coming. And the consequences will be horrific, which is why this meeting is so important today. Already, Russia's war in eastern Ukraine has killed more than 14,000 Ukrainians, nearly 3 million Ukrainians, half of whom are elderly people and children, need food, shelter, and life-saving assistance. Devastating as this situation is, it would pale in comparison to the humanitarian impact of the full-scale land invasion Russia is currently planning in Ukraine. Over the years, Russian leaders have claimed that Ukraine is not a real country and questioned its right to self-determination. So let's be clear. Ukraine is a UN member state that recently celebrated 3 decades of independence. It has a proud people and a rich culture. Ukraine is a sovereign country and a sovereign people entitled to determine their own future without the threat of force. This is not just the conviction that Ukrainians hold. It is a right enshrined by the UN Charter, a right that Russia and every other member of this institution has freely committed to upholding. Our international order is not perfect, but it is grounded in respect for people and countries to govern themselves, to defend themselves, and to associate with whom they choose. All countries have a stake in defending and preserving these principles, and nothing could be more fundamental.
Every country has the right to defend themselves except Trump in defending against Mexico.
What would it mean for the world if former empires had license to start reclaiming territory by force? This would set us down a dangerous path. Russia could, of course, choose a different path, the path of diplomacy. In recent weeks, the United States, along with our European allies and partners, and other nations around the globe, concerned by Russia's threat to Ukraine, have continued to do everything we can to resolve this crisis peacefully. In all of these talks, our messages have been clear and consistent. We seek the path of peace. We seek the path of dialogue. We do not want confrontation, but we will be decisive, swift, and united should Russia further invade Ukraine. We continue to believe there is a diplomatic path out of the crisis caused by Russia's unprovoked military buildup. We're working to pursue the
Now, the only broadcast journalist on board HMS. Tensions have escalated between Russia and the United Kingdom on the seas off the coast of Crimea. More than 20 Russian aircraft and 2 Coast Guard ships have been shadowing a British warship, HMS Defender, sailing some 12 miles off the coastline. Russia sailing some 12 miles off the coastline. Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, that was back in 2014, but this annexation has not been recognized internationally. The Russians are accusing the Royal Navy of violating their territorial waters. The British say that they are in fact in Ukrainian waters. Now, the only broadcast journalist on board HMS Defender is the BBC's defence correspondent Jonathan Beale, and he's been describing the hostile warnings from Russia as Defender's crew were preparing for a possible confrontation.
This is not a drill.
Come in, take the seat straight away. We want the curtain is up through.
A British warship in the Black Sea about to make a
So we're straight into the thick of it. We're going to action stations now. Just bring us up to our highest state of readiness.
Well, HMS Defender has just left the port of Odessa. I don't think it's
diplomacy in every possible venue. But we also know that diplomacy will not succeed in an atmosphere of threat and military escalation. That is why we have brought this situation before the Security Council today. The United States has been clear that this is truly about Russia's security concerns in Europe. We are offering them an opportunity to address these concerns at the negotiating table. The test of Russia's good faith in the coming days and weeks is whether they will come to that table and stay at that table until we reach an understanding. If they refuse to do so, the world will know why and who is responsible. Fellow members of the Council and other UN member states, we urge you to assess not only Russia's statements, but their actions with clear eyes, to evaluate the risk this presents not just to Ukraine's border and its people, but to all of us. And to speak clearly and forcefully in favor of the path of diplomacy rather than the path of conflict. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States and give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this open meeting, and thank you, Secretary General Picardo, for your briefing. Madam President, the primary responsibility of the Security Council is to maintain peace and security with a view to preventing conflicts in the world. We have argued here several times that in terms of prevention, the Council has still a long way to go. The Council has been seized many times to discuss the situation in Ukraine since the beginning of the aggression in 2014, and here we are again today. We express our deep concerns on the military buildup of Russia near Ukraine in recent months. Dozens of battalions have been already dislocated to the Ukrainian border. Military troops are being dispatched from eastern to western part of Russia. This includes heavy combat forces, tanks, artillery, air defense systems, and ballistic missiles. Several thousands of Russian troops have also been sent to Belarus. This movement of troops and weaponry is very worrying, has caused anxiety and fear among people in Ukraine, and justifiably serious international concerns, particularly for us in Europe. Madam President, let me reconfirm our unwavering support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Dear colleagues, in 1994, 27 years ago, Ukraine received security assurances through the Budapest Memorandum, where Russia, together with the US and UK, pledged, and I quote, to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine, in exchange for giving up its nuclear arsenal. The signatories also reaffirmed their commitment to seek UN Security Council action to provide assistance to Ukraine should it become a victim of an act of aggression. We call on Russia and the Security Council to expressly confirm the respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Madam President, it would be wrong to consider the threat of a military attack by Russia against Ukraine as another crisis between Russia and the West. This is a challenge to the European security order and to the whole international security architecture, which is based on the UN Charter. It is an affront to the 1975 Helsinki Final Act and its decalogue, upon which OSCE is founded and where Russia is a part. These lost developments on the Russian-Ukrainian border are a well-known playbook. We have seen them in Georgia in 2008 and in Ukraine repeatedly since 2014, unfortunately at the cost of thousands of lives, civilian and military. Russia has used military violence as a means of achieving its political and geopolitical goals. Madam President, Russia is a big country and has a role to play in European and world geopolitics. It can play an important part in making the world a better and a safer place. Unfortunately, it is doing the contrary. The narratives of spheres of influence in Europe or dictating by threats
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
of another time, reminiscences of the Cold War. Countries are and should be free to join whichever organization they want, be it NATO, European Union, CSTO, or CIS. Sovereign countries take decisions by their free will, not under the threat of a gun. Madam President, what is to gain in a potential conflict to which everyone anticipates the disastrous consequences? What can justify the loss of thousands of lives, widespread destruction, disappearance of relations, continued tensions, including, as it has been made repeatedly clear, severe consequences for us itself? No other place knows more about war and its disastrous consequences than this room. Therefore, we must be able to see beyond and seek other means to address issues, however complex they are or seem to be. Albania believes that this crisis should be solved through talks and discussion. Finding solutions through negotiations was our primary focus during the OSCE chairmanship in office in 2020. It remains the same now in the Council. There are several mechanisms to be used through diplomatic efforts. Concrete steps towards de-escalation are needed, paving the ground towards talks in efforts to seek solutions.
I don't give a shit who he is with. I want you to pull Commander Limson out of that meeting right now.
Ma'am, I'm not really sure that I can...
Shut the fuck up and listen to me. If you want to move our straight strike, if you will attack, an attack, give me a goddamn list of every person on Luna with a direct line of communication to Fleet Command. Fuck.
Christian,
What?
the second rock just hit Earth.
Where?
About 40 kilometers northwest of Philadelphia. And we've lost communication with you. At least now they know it's an attack.
They can't see the rocks. They don't know why. We have to get through to the Secretary General herself. Tell her directly what we know.
We'll convince her.
She'll be in the Citro bunker.
No.
They don't understand why a mirror would punch back.
She's not in New York. She's on some truck in South Asia trade zone talks.
Right. Secret Service will have her off the ground by now. We need to contact the UN one.
Medics from Fort Wayne and Fort Drum are being deployed to the disaster area, along with 80 MEVs and 50 clearance for search and rescue. Medical Corps is setting up triage units around Syracuse and Pittsburgh.
I want relief drills around the clock in the air to resupply first responders and make sure the UNAID and the Red Cross get anything they need.
Fleet Command recommends that we head to Luna immediately until they can better assess
We're not going to Luna.
Nancy, the planet's under
And
attack.
I'm not abandoning it. What the hell's going on with the first responders?
The Planetary Defense Command says it's possible the entire Sentinel system's been hacked.
Jesus.
What the fuck?
I went to the academy with half the officers on that plane. Not even one of them will pick up. We've been blackballed by our whole goddamn staff.
That's it. His staff. Casey.
Madam Avasarala.
Listen to me. I need you to do exactly as I say.
Ma'am, this is Chef Casey on UN 1.
I know who I fucking called. You fattened me up for years with macaroons. Now, listen. Nancy, you have to listen to me, please.
God damn it, sir. I'm sorry she made me.
The rocks crashing down on Earth are covered in Martian stealth composites. That's why our spotters cannot see them.
Why would Mars?
It's not Mars. It's
Bucko and arrows.
Yes, and I can prove it. But right now, you have to trust me.
What do you recommend?
The voice tower satellites are the only thing we have that can penetrate stealth. You have to link them to the spotters. That's the best chance to destroy any more rocks that are on the way.
How many more are there?
I don't know, which is why you have to act immediately.
Retest the watchtowers and the sentinels. Just do it. Thank you. You may have just saved millions.
Such efforts should be made in good faith and not be conducted in a climate of escalation rhetoric. The resumption of the Normandy format meetings last week in Paris was the right step, and we hope that this process will continue. Madam President, we all should bear in mind that the crisis in and around Ukraine has a direct impact on the whole Europe. Instrumentalization of ethnic minorities, targeted cyber attacks, political interference here and there for political gains, and a growing tendency of genocide denial and glorification on war crimes and war criminals. All these are acts that seek destabilization, create tension, and should be treated as a threat to peace and security because they are. This is why we deem of paramount importance to invest in prevention, and I hope this meeting will be part of such genuine efforts, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. And I'm grateful to Under-Secretary General Picardo for her briefing. Madam President, the first article in the UN Charter defines our purpose here: to take collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace. Today, over 100,000 Russian troops are massed on Ukraine's borders. They are equipped with tanks, armored vehicles, rocket artillery, and short-range ballistic missiles. They are supported by Russian air and maritime long-range strike capabilities. This is not a routine deployment. This is the largest military build-up in Europe in decades. In the best-case scenario, the scale of the Russian forces assembled on 3 sides of Ukraine is deeply destabilizing. In the worst case, it is preparation for a military invasion of a sovereign country. Madam President, in 2008, Russia told this council that it was sending peacekeepers into Georgia. In reality, it was invading an independent, democratic country. In 2014, Russia denied to this council the presence of its forces in Crimea. In reality, its soldiers were annexing part of an independent, democratic Ukraine. Today, Russia denies that its forces are posing a threat to Ukraine. But yet again, we see disinformation, cyber attacks, and destabilizing plots directed against an independent, democratic country. Madam President, the United Kingdom welcomes our discussion today as part of the intense diplomatic effort to ensure Russia de-escalates the situation and avoids conflict. We are unwavering in our support for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. At the same time, we have sought dialogue with Russia through the OSCE, the NATO-Russia Council, and bilateral discussions at all levels of the Russian government. We are ready to address mutual security concerns based on existing European security structures and international commitments. This includes our expectation that Russia should address our concerns. We are committed to a constructive dialogue if Russia is genuine about finding a diplomatic solution. This Council has a vital interest in this diplomatic effort. Because let's be clear, this is not a regional issue. Any Russian invasion or act of aggression against Ukraine would be a gross breach of international law and Russia's commitments under the Charter. Conflict would result in terrible bloodshed and destabilize the entire international community. There should be no doubt about how costly such a miscalculation would be for Russia, or how devastating it would be for the people of Ukraine. Only provocation is to want a democratic future for their country. There will be no winners, only victims. Civilians caught in the crossfire or forced to flee. Families grieving the loss of fallen soldiers on both sides. So, Madam President, we urge Russia to make clear in this Council that it will abide by its obligations under the Charter, that it has no plans to invade Ukraine, that it will refrain from the threat or use of force against its neighbour, that it will not further undermine Ukraine's sovereignty or territorial integrity by military or any other means, and that it will stand down its troops. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Madam President, the situation at Ukraine's borders is a source of deep concern for France. The build-up of considerable military capacities along the border of a neighboring sovereign state represents threatening conduct. It raises legitimate questions on Russia's intentions, particularly since this country has already infringed the territorial integrity of Ukraine in the past. France France reaffirms its full support for the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. France calls on Russia to engage in de-escalating the situation, to abide by international law, and to participate constructively in dialogue within the framework of established international mechanisms. The priority is to work together towards a swift de-escalation. President Macron has made efforts in that regard over the last few days during his trip to Berlin and then during his telephone call with President Putin. This Security Council meeting should also be in line with this objective. France supports all efforts at dialogue within the different existing frameworks, and we hope that Europeans will be fully involved. In the context of the Normandy format that brings together Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine, these efforts enabled at the 26th of January meeting in Paris an agreement on a statement of support for the unconditional compliance with the ceasefire and the implementation of the Minsk agreements. We will pursue efforts in this direction at the next meeting planned to be held in short order in Berlin. Dialogue, regardless of the venue in which it takes place, must observe the fundamental principles underpinning European security as established in the Charter of the United Nations, in the founding documents of the OSCE, including the Helsinki Final Act and the Charter of Paris. These principles comprise, in particular, the sovereign equality and the territorial integrity of states, the inviolability of borders, the non-recourse to the threat or the use of force, and the freedom of states to either choose or change their own security measures. They are neither negotiable nor subject to any revision nor reinterpretation. Notions of spheres of influence have no place in the 21st century. If Russia does not choose the path of dialogue and respect for international law, the response will be robust and united. Any fresh infringement of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine by Russia will have massive consequences and a severe cost. Europeans are working on coordinated restrictive measures and stand ready, together with their partners, to react. If the path of dialogue and cooperation is chosen, the European Union stands ready to engage to develop its relations with Russia on the basis of a united, long-term and strategic approach in accordance with the 5 guiding principles from 2016. In the context of current threats and tensions, France reaffirms its solidarity with the Ukrainian people and government. With our European partners, we will continue to mobilize in support of Ukraine, particularly through support for reforms. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France and I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Madam President. We have been closely following the evolving developments relating to Ukraine, including through ongoing high-level security talks between the Russian Federation and the United States, as well as under the Normandy format in Paris. India's interest is in finding a solution that can provide for immediate de-escalation of tensions, taking into account the legitimate security interests of all countries, and aimed towards securing long-term peace and stability in the region and beyond. We have also been in touch with all concerned parties. It is our
peace.
Considered view that the issues can only be resolved through diplomatic dialogue. In this context, we welcome the efforts underway, including under the Minsk Agreement and the Normandy format. Flowing from the concluded meeting in Paris under the Normandy format, we also welcome the unconditional observance of the July 2020 ceasefire and reaffirmation of Minsk agreements as the basis of work under the ongoing Normandy format, in particular, commitment of all sides to reduce disagreements on the way forward. We also welcome their agreement to meet in Berlin in 2 weeks. We urge all parties to continue to engage through all diplomatic channels and to keep working towards the full implementation of the Minsk package. Quiet and constructive diplomacy is the need of the hour. Any steps that increase tension may best be avoided by all sides in the larger interest of securing international peace and security. More than 20,000 Indian students and nationals live and study in different parts of Ukraine, including in its border areas. The well-being of Indian nationals is a priority to us. Madam President, I reiterate our call for the peaceful resolution of the situation by sincere and sustained diplomatic efforts to ensure that concerns of all sides are resolved through constructive dialogue. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank the representative of India, and I give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you very much, Madam President. A few moments ago, this Council voted to adopt the agenda for this meeting to consider the situation in Ukraine. Our responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security makes it imperative to encourage the path of dialogue and preventive diplomacy. That is the only way to end the tensions, bridge the differences between the parties, and forge a unified and pacific position on the situation in Ukraine. Let me begin by thanking Rosemary DiCarlo, UNSC for Political Affairs and Peace Building, for the briefing. I also welcome the participation of the representatives of Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and Lithuania in this meeting. Ghana has been following closely the situation in Ukraine. I've also listened carefully to the briefing we just received from the Secretariat, as well as the statement of delegations that have spoken before. We have paid careful attention to the perspectives of the key parties to the situation and hope that at the end of this meeting, the views of members of this Council will be closer to each other than when we first began. We note from the situation in Ukraine that while there has been a build-up of Russian troops at the internationally recognized borders in Ukraine, those troops are presently within the national territory of the Russian Federation. We also have taken note that while the military build-up of the troops of the Russian Federation are within its borders, this has caused for Ukraine and other parties a concern over the intentions of the build-up and its prospective implications on the international peace and security. We therefore welcome the ongoing dialogue between the Russian Federation and the United States to address primary and secondary security concerns that have implications on the situation in Ukraine, as well as the recent face-to-face dialogue between the representatives of the Russian Federation and Ukraine under the Normandy format in Paris, after several months of no contact, to enhance trust and remove possibilities of an accidental incident. We note with concern the implications the situation has had on the economy of Ukraine and neighboring markets, and welcome in this regard the call by the President of Ukraine for an easing of the strong narratives on the situation. This must be a time for confidence building to facilitate a restoration of normalcy for the people of Ukraine. In concluding, Madam President, Ghana believes that in conformity with the provisions of the charter of this organization, differences between member states should only be resolved through peaceful means. We remain encouraged by the ongoing diplomatic engagement between the parties and reiterate our support for those efforts which should also take into account the delicate nature of the situation. Thank you very much for your time.
I thank the representative of Ghana. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thanks also to Under Secretary General DiCarlo for your briefing. Madam President, today's discussion is an important opportunity for the Council to address the developing situation at Ukraine's borders, which has become a matter of profound international concern. Let me underline at the outset that Ireland, along with our EU partners, is a strong and unwavering supporter of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. At this moment of rising tension on Ukraine's frontiers, arising from Russia's military buildup, Ireland calls for calm, de-escalation, and the pursuit of diplomacy. We call also for constructive and determined engagement on all dialogue tracks, including the Normandy format and the OSCE. Ireland is fully committed to the core principles enshrined in the UN Charter. These include the sovereign, equality, and territorial integrity of states. We recall today that these principles were agreed collectively and freely by all members of the United Nations. Moreover, European security is built on a series of essential commitments and obligations. It is the fundamental right of a sovereign and independent state to chart its own path in the world, to choose its own foreign policy, and to make arrangements for the security and defence of its territory. The Helsinki Final Act, one of the foundational documents of the OSCE, confirms the obligation of states, and I quote, to respect each other's sovereign equality and the right of every state to juridical equality, to territorial integrity, and to freedom and political independence, end of quote. Subsequent agreements, including the Charter of Paris and the Charter of European Security, agreed in Istanbul in 1999, reaffirm the core principles and underpinning collective European security. Madam President, earlier this month, Ireland marked 100 years of a hard-won independence. Just as we would not accept another state determining our foreign and security policy, Ukraine similarly has the sovereign right to choose its own policies. In this Council, we are too often faced with the terrible humanitarian consequences of violent conflict, usually where diplomacy and dialogue have failed. Force is never the answer. It is not the answer now. What is needed now, above all, is a negotiated diplomatic solution that reinforces our collective security in Europe. We have the institutions and the mechanisms within which to pursue this solution. Let us use them. Absent that, it will be innocent civilians who once again pay the awful price of conflict. Madam President, that is not a prospect any of us wish to contemplate. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, China opposes the Security Council's holding of this open meeting as requested by the United States. The permanent representative of the US to the UN, in her letter to the President of the Council dated January 27th, claimed that the reason why the US is asking the Council to hold this open meeting was that Russia's deployment of troops along the Ukrainian border posed a threat to international peace and security. China cannot align itself with this point of view. Recently, there have indeed been some tensions over the issue of Ukraine, and we are paying attention to what exactly are causing the tensions. Some countries, led by the United States, have claimed that there will soon be a war in Ukraine. Russia has repeatedly stated that it has no plans to launch any military action, and Ukraine has made it clear that it does not need a war. Under such circumstances, what is the basis for the countries concerned to insist that there may be a war? We note that the United States, Ukraine, and the relevant European countries, as well as NATO, are having varying forms of diplomatic contacts with Russia. The parties concerned should persist in seeking to resolve their differences through dialogues and negotiations. What we urgently need now is quiet diplomacy, but not microphone diplomacy. This is the viewpoint held by many members of the Council who have also made unrelenting efforts towards this end. Regrettably, the US did not accept such a constructive proposal. At a time when dialogues and negotiations are underway and concrete progress is yet to be made, the holding of such an open meeting by the Council is clearly not conducive to creating a favorable environment for dialogues and negotiations, nor is it conducive to diffusing the tension. China once again calls on all parties concerned to remain calm, not to do anything to aggravate tension or hype up the crisis, but to properly resolve their differences through consultations on an equal.
You son of a bitch.
Nice to see you too.
You went behind my back.
The Secretary General asked me for my professional opinion, and I gave it to him.
Inaros was connected to the arsenal on Callisto. Maybe that should be on the table as well.
Callisto is a Martian facility.
So what? If the Belters on Tycho threw in with Inaros, I call that a legitimate target too. Earth Corp or not.
A target for what?
Follow-up strikes. I'm expanding the Palace Initiative.
The only thing we should be discussing is how to spend this strike as a limited military objective. And make it clear that we are not at war with the Belt.
We are at war with the Belt.
Madam, I respect you feel differently, but...
Inaros is an extremist, a rogue element, as much of a danger to his own people as he is to us.
He didn't throw rocks at Belters.
And we cannot let him frame this any other way.
I understand why you're upset. I should have told you about Palace when I made my decision.
If we continue to attack civilian targets...
The way Inaros did to us.
Is he our role model now? No matter what Marco Inaros claims, the Belters are not one nation. We can exploit that. We can ally with certain factions, enlist them in common cause.
That kind of diplomacy takes time which we can't afford to waste. My job is to make our people safer and to reduce the enemy's ability to hurt us as quickly as possible.
We have to take this fight back to the bastards who started it. And anyone else who cheers them on.
You think I don't want that? You think I don't go to sleep every night dreaming about putting Marco Inaros on the hooks? Watching him gasp for air and making his children watch him draw his final breath because he murdered my husband. My Arjun is dead, and I'd sacrifice everything to bring him back. And right now, everyone who loved someone on Palace is feeling what I feel. For every partisan we killed, we made 10 more.
Madam, I am truly sorry for your loss. But we can't let emotion make these choices. We have to be rational and objective.
I think we should hit Ceres Station. It's the biggest port in the Belt.
I thought Anderson Dawes was a friend.
He'd never oppose Inaros when push comes to shove.
With Ceres and Paulus denied, the Naros will be forced back to the outer planets to resupply. It'll spread them thin.
It's a bold move.
There are millions of people in cities, hundreds of thousands of children.
What are the scenarios for a full-scale attack?
Is the intention to incapacitate or occupy?
I will not be a part of this.
Are you stepping down?
Yes, sir.
Fine. I accept your resignation. You're dismissed.
You'll have to accept mine as well, sir.
Jesus, Dane.
And mine.
We're supposed to be better.
On the basis of fully taking into account each other's legitimate security concerns and on the basis of mutual respect. Madam President, China's position on Ukraine is consistent. To solve this issue, we still need to return to the origin of implementing the new Minsk agreement. This agreement, endorsed by the Security Council in its Resolution 2202, is a binding foundational political document recognized by all parties and should really be effectively implemented. China supports all efforts in line with this direction and spirit of this agreement and hopes that all parties concerned will show their positive willingness to implement this new Minsk agreement, resolve their differences arising from the implementation of the agreement through consultation, and promote the actual implementation of this new Minsk agreement. The expansion of NATO is a problem difficult to circumvent in handling the current tension. NATO is the product of the Cold War, and NATO expansion epitomizes group politics. We believe that the security of one country cannot be achieved at the expense of the security of other countries. Still less can regional security be guaranteed by intensifying or even expanding military groups. Today, in the 21st century, all parties should completely abandon the Cold War mentality and come up with a balanced, effective, and sustainable European security mechanism through negotiations. And Russia's legitimate security concerns should be heeded and addressed. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. And first and foremost, I would like to thank those countries who conducted themselves and deemed it possible to vote against or abstain against the proposal of the US to discuss this topic today. One might have the impression that Russia is scared of discussing the situation regarding Ukraine and therefore put forward this procedural vote. Russia is not refusing to discuss the situation in Ukraine, but we just don't understand what we are discussing here today and why we are indeed here today. As I already said, on the 17th of February, we are planning to hold a meeting during our presidency of the 7th anniversary of the implementation of the Minsk agreements, where we are able to talk about the situation with regarding Ukrainian settlement. But today's meeting is not about that at all. Recently, we've been encountering a very unusual, even given today's difficult time situation, a very unusual situation. The deployment of Russian troops within our own territory has frequently occurred on varying scales before and has not caused any hysterics whatsoever. Troops and servicemen who are in their own areas of deployment and barracks where they were before, and they are where they were before, are not actually on the border. So this deployment of Russian troops in our own territory is getting our Western and US colleagues to say that there's going to be a planned military action and even an act of aggression. But the USPR said as if that act of aggression has already taken place. I very carefully listened to her statement. The military action of Russia against Ukraine that they're all assuring us is going to take place in just a few weeks' time, if not a few days' time. There, however, is no proof confirming such a serious accusation whatsoever being put forward. However, it is not preventing people from whipping up hysteria to such an extent that an actual economic impact is already being felt by our Ukrainian neighbors. Our Western colleagues are talking about the need for de-escalation. However, first and foremost, they themselves are whipping up tensions and rhetoric and are provoking escalation. The discussions about a threat of war is provocative in and of itself. You are almost calling for this. You want it to happen. You're waiting for it to happen, as if you want to make your words become a reality. This is despite the fact that we are constantly rejecting these allegations. And this is despite the fact that no threat of a planned invasion into Ukraine from the lips of any Russian politician or public figure over all of this period has been made. No such threat has been made. Rather, at all levels, we've been categorically rejecting such plans. And we're going to do this right now. Everybody who claims the opposite is misleading you. If our Western colleagues who provoked and supported the 2014 bloody anti-constitutional coup, bringing to power in Kiev nationalists, radicals, Russophobes, and pure fascists, Nazis rather, if they'd not done this, then we to date would be living in a spirit of good neighborly relations and mutual cooperation. However, some in the West just don't clearly like this positive scenario. What's happening today is yet another attempt to drive a wedge between Russia and Ukraine. Thanks to their geopolitical gains, our colleagues have been suffering for some 7 years now. The Ukrainians are actively being brainwashed. They're cultivated with Russophobia and radical thinking, leading to the belief that for Ukraine to have a bright future, it mustn't establish relations with its neighbors, but rather at any cost strive to join the EU and NATO. They are banning Russian, which is the native language for a significant, if not the majority of people in Ukraine. They are causing an Orthodox split, church split, or divide. They are making heroes out of those people who fought on the side of Hitler, who destroyed Jews, Poles, Ukrainians, and Russians. The interests of the Ukrainian people
As tens of thousands of Russian troops line the Ukrainian border, citizens in Kiev are taking matters into their own hands. Ukraine's capital, much like the rest of the country, is a city with differing political opinions. Many remember the brutal 2014 riots that preceded Russia's annexation of Crimea, and are keen not to return to those desperate times. In a bid to prepare for Russian invasion, members of Ukraine's far-right movement are holding military training for volunteers. The group are teaching self-defense in case of an attack from Russia, under the slogan "Don't panic, get ready." They claimed they were holding training because of the absolute ineffective actions of Ukraine's government. Hundreds of volunteers of all ages took part in drills like tactical maneuvers and weapons training. It's clear
in this destructive game is something that our Western colleagues are not taking into consideration. Their aim is to prevent the natural brotherly coexistence of our two people, brotherly peoples, peoples and countries rather, which would destroy their plans to weaken Russia and would create an arc of instability around it. There's nothing that we're seeing that's new here in the same spirit of divide and conquer, the divide and rule. This same spirit was characteristic for Western powers, or Western states rather, earlier. It's also noteworthy that our American colleagues artificially are getting involved in the sham tension that they themselves created on the Russian-Ukrainian border. There was the negotiation process pushed forward by ourselves to ensure for Russia legally binding security guarantees. They deliberately are creating the impression that Moscow apparently is specifically or on purpose stirring up tension that means that it can be more accessible for the US and NATO. If you look at the timetable for the negotiation process, you'll see that such considerations are fundamentally untrue. The situation, in fact, is completely the opposite. Our Western colleagues are trying on the top of this wave of hysteria to boil our dialogue slowly down to so-called settlement of the situation on the border with Ukraine. Our security demands are much broader. The non-accession of Ukraine to NATO, the non-deployment in its territory of foreign troops. All of this is just one part of the agreements that could fundamentally improve the military political situation in Europe and for the world as a whole. And this type of agreement is something that we talked about in the Astana, Istanbul, and the OSCE summits, where apart from the freedom to choose one's allies or alliances, it was also the stipulation that the security guarantees of some states should not be carried out to the detriment of the security of other states. Since our American colleagues convened us today, let them show us any evidence apart from bogus narratives that Russia is intending to attack Ukraine. In the statement of my American colleague, there was a significant hodgepodge of accusations of aggressive actions by Russia, but no specific fact given. Incidentally, I'd like to put a question not only to our US colleague, but also to those who said, where did you get the figure of 100,000 troops that are deployed, as you state, on the Russian-Ukrainian border? Although that is not the case. We have never cited that figure. We've never confirmed that figure. We do recall this, and we recall this since Secretary of State Colin Powell in this very room waved around a vial with an unidentified substance as so-called evidence of the presence of WMDs in Iraq. They didn't find any weapons, but what happened with that country is well known to one and all. Ukraine as well is a country, it seems, that our colleagues are prepared to sacrifice for their own pernicious interests. Otherwise, it's hard to explain why, in convening us today, the initiators of this meeting did not even heed the opinion of the president of Ukraine, who asked the West not to whip up panic, which has already had a harmful impact on the economic situation in the country. Otherwise, it's difficult to explain why our colleagues from the US and a number of other countries are actively pumping Ukraine full of weapons and ammunition, and talk about this with great pride, moreover. The weapons that it would readily use against civilians in the east of its own country. And all this is being done in violation of the Minsk agreements approved by the UN Security Council as the only basis for a peaceful settlement of the internal Ukrainian conflict. Incidentally, to my American colleague, well, she mentioned the fact that 14,000 people have died in the conflict. I would recommend that she reads the report of the Special Monitoring Mission of the OSCE and look at what side, how many people died on each side out of these 14,000. Most of these people are civilians in Donbass who died from shelling from the Ukrainian armed forces. Madam President, the maneuvers of the US regarding the convening of this meeting is particularly hypocritical because it was the Americans who hold the record for having troop presences outside their territory. American troops, advisors, and weapons, including nuclear weapons, are frequently deployed thousands of kilometers from Washington. I'm not even talking about the fact that the military adventures of the US have killed hundreds of thousands of civilians of countries, of places where they were supposed to be bringing peace and democracy. The US consistently, including over recent years, has used force against other states without the authorization of the UN Security Council. In their arsenal, unilateral sanctions and coercive measures, threats of implementing it seems to be like the ruling of some kind of Supreme Court that they want to impose this upon enemy. For example, many countries of the UN have been subject to aggression or attacks by the US, and 191 countries of the Security Council have seen American troops deployed there. There is data available on the internet stating that there are 750 US bases in more than 80 countries of the world. The overall number are deployed abroad of US troops. This is 175,000 troops deployed abroad. 175,000. And more than 60,000 troops are deployed in Europe. The volume of the US military budget was $700 million. 778 rather. So Russia's budget was 12 times lower. So these examples pose a specific threat to international peace and security, and they're clear examples of this. As regards the calls to settle the crisis regarding Ukraine, we wholeheartedly clapping for this. But this crisis just has one dimension: it's domestic Ukrainian crisis. And changing the situation, improving it, can only be done through Kiev implementing the already mentioned Minsk agreements that stipulate primarily direct dialogue with Donetsk and Lugansk. There is no other option if our Western partners push Kiev to sabotage the Minsk agreements, something that Ukraine is that they're willingly they're willingly doing, then that might end in the absolute worst way for Ukraine. And not because somebody has destroyed it, but because it would have destroyed itself. And Russia has absolutely nothing to do with this. Don't try to shift the blame onto somebody else. And we are going instantly to talk about all of this in detail on the 17th of February during the long-planned annual UN Security Council meeting on the implementation of Resolution 2202. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to thank the Undersecretary General, Rosemary DiCarlo, for her briefing. Madam President, my country is following closely the prevailing situation at the borders of Ukraine and Russia. We have taken note of the information on a considerable mobilization of Russian troops at Ukraine's borders that portend imminent military action. This alarming information is accompanied on the ground by a true maelstrom of activity, along with the deployment of troops and military hardware from friendly countries of Ukraine. The consequential rhetorical escalation and acute tensions are polarizing important diplomatic activity conducted through various initiatives, including the Normandy format in the framework of the implementation of the Minsk agreements. In the face of this situation of particularly worrisome tensions, my country, aware of the challenges and the potential of the forces in place, calls on all stakeholders to demonstrate restraint and to favor the path of dialogue and negotiation in order to preserve peace and stability in the region. It is time for the international community and its members to activate the channels of preventive diplomacy, such as those provided by Chapter 6 of the UN Charter enshrined in the peaceful settlement of disputes. It is clear that the effectiveness of this preventive diplomacy depends not only on the good faith of the protagonists, but also on the tactful and calm conduct, as well as the framework within which such diplomacy occurs. We see a two-sided rhetoric. On the one hand, an alarming rhetoric on the imminence of military action in Ukraine, and on the other, a denial from the other side. These intensify the fragmentation of this council, just as the people of the world are expecting from our council a consensus and resolute action commensurate with the havoc wrought by wars and crises that are bringing bloodshed to several regions of the planet. The strength of this council resides in its unity. It is unity and not fragmentation that make this council worthy of its mandate, working for peoples of the world. We believe that diplomacy in its most practical and efficient forms is capable of bringing calm to the borders of Ukraine. To conclude, I would like to echo here the appeal made last Friday by the Ukrainian president, asking for parties to exercise restraint and to refrain from whipping up panic. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Gabon, and I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And let me also thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for the briefing she has put forward to the Council this morning. Geopolitical tensions and threats to international peace and security require the Security Council to engage promptly and timely. Open references to military actions, unilateral economic sanctions, and other measures are developments that should be avoided under the UN Charter. The Security Council must fulfill its primary objective, which is to prevent war. There is a general and urgent need to resort to meaningful dialogue with and between the parties directly involved in the escalation of tensions. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to engage constructively in talks aimed at resolving their differences. There is room to restore confidence and find a lasting diplomatic solution to this crisis. For that, we need political will and genuine commitment from all sides. Brazil encourages all parties to strictly observe international law. It is imperative to apply the principles enshrined in the Charter consistently in a non-selective manner. The prohibition of use of force, the peaceful resolution of disputes, and the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the protection of human rights are pillars of our collective security system. Brazil also highlights the need for good faith in order to address legitimate security concerns of all parties, including Russia's and Ukraine's. We encourage parties to pursue genuine talks on the implementation of the Minsk agreements. Security Council Resolution 2202 which provided useful guidelines to address the situation in eastern Ukraine, is also a valuable tool in the diplomatic efforts to overcome the situation. Brazil welcomes the resumption of talks in the Normandy format and the renewed commitment to the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. Despite the sensitive and difficult nature of the issue on our agenda today, I would like to conclude with a note of hope. It has been encouraging to hear, over the past few days, statements to the effect that there is no military solution to the situation. At this moment in particular, this should be the motto of the whole United Nations membership and of the Security Council for a renewed commitment to diplomacy and prevention. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Brazil, and I give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor and also for the able way in which you have presided over the Security Council in the month of January. I thank Under-Secretary General Mary DiCarlo for her briefing, and I welcome the participation of the representatives of Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland. Kenya abstained on the procedural vote to hold this meeting. We did so to reflect our contention that the main issue in question here is the impasse between NATO and the Russian Federation. We believe that it is imminently solvable and that the diplomatic steps underway already show promise. This, rather than escalation in search of a winner-take-all outcome, is what is required to support and protect international peace and security. Kenya has always maintained that the respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all countries is a cornerstone of global peace. Where there are disputes regarding territorial jurisdiction or security interests, we strongly support patient diplomacy as the first, second, and third options. When the dispute is between major powers and regards the security of a third country, it is imperative that they embrace a spirit of compromise. We believe that the United States, NATO, and the Russian Federation have an opportunity to establish a diplomatic framework that will allow them to resolve their differences. Their security and that of the entire world depends on them willingly taking this step, not in ushering in a new age of containment, provocation, and proxy actions. Compromise is not surrender. The special powers given to the Security Council's permanent members demand that they embrace this principle if the United Nations is not to go the way of the doomed League of Nations. Africa recalls the rejections of compromise and the search for total victory that led to the Cold War. We experienced that Cold War as a series of hot wars and interventions that deeply damaged our dreams for peace, development, and competent, inclusive government. Our internal divisions and fragilities were weaponized at the altar of geopolitical rivalry. It confirms the truth of the African saying that recognizes when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Madam President, given that the majority of the conflict situations the Security Council deals with are in Africa, we do not want them to serve as surrogates for a new Cold War. We in Africa, therefore, have a direct stake in de-escalation and renewed faith in diplomacy. We have serious challenges to solve together. Rarely has the world more urgently needed a United Nations that can deliver ambition. Madam President, Kenya believes that there is still plenty of opportunity for the Normandy format talks, the trilateral contact group on Ukraine, and the direct negotiations between the United States and the Russian Federation to produce a satisfactory outcome. We urge all these parties to ensure that their negotiations respect the security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Faith in innovative diplomacy may also allow for agreements between today's major powers, inspired by the 1975 Helsinki Accords, which did deliver some stability to Europe during the Cold War. This time, however, such agreements need to advance the principle of non-interference to other parts of the world, and particularly to Africa. Madam President, in closing, it is critical that diplomacy and its acceptance of compromise as an inevitable outcome win the day. If there are future discussions to be held in the Security Council on this matter, let it be to announce a new era of cooperation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya, and I give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And thank you to Undersecretary General Di Carlo for her briefing. I would like to welcome the representatives of Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and Lithuania to this meeting. Madam President, I'd like to begin by noting that my country deems the holding of this meeting as timely, and that in accordance with our foreign policy principles. In addition, we deem it relevant since the Security Council must be informed about the prevailing situation in Ukraine. It is not in our interest to contribute to further polarizing the narrative. Thus, I will limit myself to noting what, for Mexico, should be basic principles for the consideration of this matter in accordance with the United Nations Charter. In this case, I will refer to three of them. The prohibition on the threat or the use of force in international relations, the principle of non-intervention, and the peaceful settlement of disputes.
Sinun kortteli. Sinun.
If they were here half an hour ago, we don't have long before they arrive. Understand? Romanov must move immediately.
Товарищ полковник.
What?
A message.
Now? Very well.
What is it, Uncle?
Julia, it's your wife. She...
Что?
They're dead, Julia. She and your daughter. Killed yesterday when the Americans raided Serbia. I'm so sorry.
Sorry. You're at war. They died for the state. They died for socialism. I'm proud.
You are my deepest...
I don't want sympathy. I want leaders with the courage to prevent NATO from walking into our soil.
Julia, we're dealing with strong adversaries.
Then we must be stronger. Comrade Colonel, our forward scouts reported both NATO helicopters.
Where the hell is Romanov with the Shilkas? Kolya, can I count on you?
Let them come, Uncle. Let them come. Just as the
Ready, boss man.
My name is Marco Inados. I am the commander of the Free Navy. We are the military arm and voice of the outer planets, and we are the ones responsible for striking our oppressors on Earth and Mars. This attack was retribution for generations of atrocities committed by the Inners against innocent Belters. No longer will Belters be persecuted and subjected to the savagery and inhumanity that the Inners have been poisoning our species with. Any further attacks on Earth and Mars will be precipitated by the inner planet's failure to recognize this new human reality. The Free Navy now possesses the last remaining sample of the proto-molecule. Any transgressions by the Inners and the Free Navy will be respected atmospheres. The vacuum, the ring gates, and the ring worlds belong to the Belt, to Belters, with the opening of the alien gates. We are at a crossroads in human history. Already we are seeing how easy it would be to carry on legacies of exploitation, injustice, prejudice, oppression in worlds. There is a better path. Under the protection of the Free Navy, the society and culture of the Belt will begin again and remake humanity without the corruption, greed, and hatred that the inner planets could not transcend. We will take what is ours by right, yes, but more than that, we will lead the Belt to a new, better form, a more human form. Citizens of the Belt, Beratnas, rise up now. In joy and glorious resolve, this day is ours. Tomorrow is ours. The future of humanity is ours. Today and forevermore, we are free.
Radar bearing 020. Where? No, it's not.
community on Friday released a long-awaited report on what it knows about UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. Some of the more than 100 instances it studied could be explained by atmospheric occurrences, foreign adversary.
It's not on YouTube, but there was a clip in Stargate a few months before the 9/11 where they said that they're gonna blow up a building because, reasons.
Ready to launch on your command. Sure about this, right? Like this is the right thing to do? Not the best time for that kind of talk.
Coming out of hyperspace in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Launch the horizon.
Oh, this is gonna get blocked actually. Okay. and so on and so forth. I think that's about as much as I can watch of the United Nations Security Council. It's as I expected. So I know that it's gonna sound like Putin's gone mad and he believes in aliens and all that funny stuff, but I still believe there's a third party at play here. May not be aliens, but there's definitely somebody who's benefiting from getting the US and the Russians to fight each other. There's definitely somebody. May not be any of us, but it's somebody.
There is something wrong here. Something which makes my sheath retract and my talons loose. I sense the ugliness of 1,000 evil thoughts. And I have located the source of these fetid emanations. They come from aboard your vessel. Foolish renegade human, why have you come here? All that you have found is your inevitable punishment. What? A human in a precursor service vehicle? How did you escape the slave human? Or are you a rogue? Although you consider us the enemy, these conclusions are flawed. We are your salvation. We bring peace. Peace built upon our social framework, imposed upon your planet, a new world order in which your prosperity and security are assured by the Urquan. We will protect you from the hands of this hostile universe, from danger so hideous, your simple minds cannot imagine their dark scope. Today, we are the enemy. In time, this will change. Soon, you will come to understand the boon of slavery we force upon you, and then you will revere and even love us for this gift. Human, you have ignored our commands, and now you will be punished. You have intruded upon the battleground of our doctrinal conflict with the Quran. This is not tolerable. We must maintain our concentration on this war. We must win. Should we lose, the consequences to you and all of us. 20,000 years along the path of now and forever, we have dominated thousands of species, yes, but we have saved hundreds from extinction. You imagine the threat of unknown invaders or alien pestilence born on the solar wind. We have seen these yourselves. We have found dead worlds without number, planets ravaged by atomic fire or Gaian collapse. These planets were not rendered sterile by outside forces. They bear sad testament to the effects of unrestrained instinct and emotion, or simple ignorance. We will prevent such mistakes. We will give you no more warnings, renegade human. A final command, human, but it is more of a plea. Your insubordination has guaranteed your death. There can be no alternative. But your species has not yet crossed the threshold of disobedience that would require us to decimate Earth. You have survived combat with us before. You may survive the ensuing battle. If this happens, leave. Return to your home. There. Interfere with us here, we may lose the doctrinal conflict with the Korah. If we are defeated, you are defeated as well. The Korah will be unleashed. They will begin a genocidal orgy, cleansing all known sentience. They will crack the slave shield around Earth and reduce the surface of your blue world to cinders. Alien, you have spoken words, and you have spoken them rightly. We will tell you our reasons why we enslave all other sentient life. We evolved on a hostile world, the descendants of solitary hunters. In those ancient days, there was no Korah or Kazertsa, only the Urquan. We explored our world, and then the space beyond. Here we met the 6 races of sentient as partners. It was on a routine planetfall that one of our million scout ships first met the Dinyari. They were evilly intelligent creatures who could control the minds of others. They wanted to rule the universe. We had no choice but to give it to them. For thousands of years, we were unthinking slaves to the Dinyari. The Dinyari had a special liking for us Urquan, so they began to tinker with our genes. They built 2 Urquan sub-races, one green, can be slaves. We would follow the path of our We decided to enslave or imprison all other intelligent life in the galaxy. We had slaves shielded one world when we learned that the Black Berkwan, under a leader, Korra, had devised the Eternal Doctrine, which called for the cleansing, the annihilation of all non-Urquan sentient life. Before we could stop them, they burned the Yoktar race's whole world.
This is not good.
You are not Saren.
What is that? Some kind of VI interface?
Rudimentary creatures of blood and flesh. You touch my mind, fumbling in ignorance, incapable of understanding.
Awareness.
I don't think this is a VI.
There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own.
Don't forget that you aren't the guy that your location represents. You're just an electrical signal.
And run their way to the planet of the last remaining free race. We met the Korra in orbit above that planet. We confronted them. They would not submit. We fought. When our battle was done, the Korra were defeated. We exiled them, sent the remnant of the Korra fleet into the unknown reaches of the galaxy. Then we began our migration, moving around the galaxy in the opposite direction of the Korra. Captain, you have heard our words. Now you have a decision to make. Submit to us, the Urquan Kazelza, or face our wrath. I am beyond your comprehension. I am sovereign.
Sovereign isn't just some Reaper ship Saren found. It's an actual Reaper.
Reaper, a label created by the Protheans to give voice to their destruction. In the end, what they chose to call us is irrelevant. We simply are.
The Protheans vanished 50,000 years ago. You couldn't have been there. It's impossible.
Organic life is nothing but a genetic mutation. An accident. Your lives.
No answer accepted. Religious terms. If you have faith, it's answered.
Did you ever meet any person from our religious history? A biblical figure. In a way. We should skip this.
No, skip it. Come on.
And the next question.
No, come on. Let's
Come on, spit it out. Good Lord. You were one of them. This is going in a direction that I didn't expect. I hoped it would be. Let's call it a 9.
Come on. You were someone in religious history?
Yes.
In the Bible?
Yes.
Someone we know? How could we not know someone in the Bible? Surely somebody important.
You may think you know it, but it's mostly myth.
The entire Bible is mostly myth and allegory with maybe some basis in historical events. You were part of that history?
Moses.
Moses was based on Mysis, an Assyrian myth, and there are earlier versions, all found floating on water. A staff that changed to a snake. Waters that were parted so followers could be led to freedom, and even receive laws with stone or wooden tablets.
One of the apostles.
They weren't really apostles. They didn't do any real teaching. Peter the fisherman learned a little more about fishing.
How do you know that?
The mythical overlay is so enormous and not good. The truth is so simple.
What can possibly justify interrupting meeting, Lucanus?
Lord Admiral, the light of the Astronomicon shines once more. Reinforcements have been dispatched to the Gothic sector. The warp storm, it is gone. Tremble before the majesty of the Emperor, for we all walk in his immortal shadow.
It's a trash bag. Looks like it anyway. Probably an actual UFO again. You'll think of me when you are all alone. Maybe the one who is waiting for you will prove untrue, then what will you do? Maybe you'll sit and decide, wishing that I would. Maybe you'll ask me to come back again, and maybe I'll say maybe. That's about the right point to end, just as Iraq was saying. Yep. So, thank you for tuning into this episode of United Nations Security Council. I got about an hour and a half into it. Thank you.